Try to imagine your life without money. Not less money. None. No coins in your pocket. No card in your wallet. No number on a screen that tells you what you're worth. How would you eat tonight? How would you get a place to sleep? For almost the entire span of human existence, this wasn't a thought experiment. It was just life. Money is so woven into your world that it feels like a law of nature, like gravity or sunlight. But it isn't. Humans lived, loved, raised children, built shelters, and survived for roughly 300,000 years before anything resembling money existed. So how did that actually work? What did people do instead? Here's where the story gets interesting, because the answer isn't what most of us were taught. For decades, textbooks told a simple tale. Before money, there was barter. You had fish, I had firewood, we traded, and eventually barter got clunky enough that someone invented coins. It's a tidy story. It's also, according to the evidence, almost entirely wrong. The anthropologist Caroline Humphrey spent years searching for a documented society that ran primarily on barter, one person trading directly with another, item for item, as their main way of getting goods. She never found one. Not a single clear historical example of a barter-based economy existed at the scale the old story assumes. So if it wasn't barter, what was it? The answer, it turns out, is memory, obligation, relationship. Picture a small community 10,000 years ago. You catch more fish than your family can eat. Your neighbor has extra roots dug from the ground. You don't haggle over an exchange rate. You just give them fish. They remember. Later, when your children are sick and you need help, they give something back. No one is keeping a ledger. No one needs to, because everyone already knows who has helped whom. This is what anthropologists call a gift economy, and it's one of the oldest known ways humans organize survival. The late anthropologist David Graeber, who spent much of his career studying the deep history of debt and exchange, argued that these systems weren't primitive or inefficient at all. They were built on something money often erodes: ongoing human trust. Doesn't that flip the whole story on its head? We tend to assume money made life easier, more civilized, more advanced. But in small, tightly bound communities, trust-based giving may have actually required less overhead than counting, weighing, and pricing everything. This wasn't just a theory built on ancient bones and old campfire circles either. The anthropologist Richard Lee spent extended time living with the Juhuansi people of the Kalahari in the 20th century, and he documented something striking. When a hunter brought back a large kill, he didn't boast about it. He downplayed it, sometimes insulted his own catch on purpose. The meat was shared out across the whole camp almost automatically, following norms everyone already understood. Lee once asked why hunters undersold their own success this way, and the answer he received has stuck with anthropologists ever since. A man who is described as a great hunter starts to think he's a chief, one elder told him, and someone like that becomes dangerous. Modesty wasn't just politeness, it was a safeguard against exactly the kind of hoarding, status-grabbing behavior that money can quietly reward. Isn't it strange that a system with no currency at all had built-in defenses against greed that our modern one still struggles with? Of course, not every early economy ran purely on generosity. Humans have always been aware of fairness, of keeping things roughly even over time. The anthropologist Marshall Salins, in his influential work on early economies, described different layers of exchange that existed side by side. Among close family, sharing was close to unconditional. Between friendly but more distant groups, there was a looser expectation of eventual balance. And with strangers or rivals, exchange could turn sharp, even hostile, more like negotiation than gift-giving. So early humans weren't naive. They were strategic, just in a completely different currency than we use today. Their currency was memory, reputation, the simple, powerful fact that everyone in a small group knew everyone else's history. Now, here's something that might surprise you even more. Some ancient exchange systems were remarkably sophisticated, long before anything like a coin existed. In the early 20th century, the anthropologist Bronisław Malinowski documented an extraordinary practice among the Trobriand islanders of the Pacific, called the Kula ring. Communities across a wide stretch of ocean exchanged ceremonial shell necklaces and armbands, traveling by canoe between islands, following routes that had existed for generations. These objects weren't used to buy food or tools. They had almost no practical use at all. Their entire value came from the relationships they represented, the voyages taken to deliver them, the trust extended across dangerous open water. Doesn't that sound almost like the opposite of how we think about value today? An object worth almost everything, precisely because it was worth nothing you could eat or wear. This is where an important idea comes in, one championed by the economic historian Karl Polanyi. Polanyi argued that in most of human history, economic activity wasn't a separate sphere of life the way it is now. You didn't go to the economy the way you go to a store. Exchange was embedded inside kinship, ritual, and community obligation. Getting food wasn't a transaction. It was a relationship. Think about what that actually means. If your survival depended on your standing in the group, then hoarding, cheating, or refusing to share wasn't just rude. It was dangerous. Your reputation kept you fed as much as your hunting or gathering skill did. Isn't it strange to think that being well-liked could once have functioned almost like a bank account? Redistribution was another major piece of the puzzle. In many early societies, a respected leader or elder didn't accumulate wealth for themselves. Their role was closer to a hub. Food and resources flowed in from across the group, and the leader's job was to make sure it flowed back out fairly, especially during hard seasons. Prestige came not from having the most, but from giving the most away. That's almost the exact reverse of how many of us think about status today, isn't it? The most vivid example of this pattern comes from the Pacific Northwest coast, where communities held elaborate ceremonial feasts known as potlatches. The anthropologist Franz Boas, one of the first outsiders to document these gatherings in detail, described hosts giving away enormous quantities of food, blankets, and carved goods, sometimes nearly everything a family owned, in a single event. To the earliest European observers, this looked wasteful, even irrational. Why would anyone deliberately empty their own storehouse? But within the community, the logic was clear. The person who gave away the most gained the most respect. Wealth that stayed locked away, untouched, and unshared, earned nothing. Wealth that moved through the community, that fed people during lean months, built something no coin ever could, standing that the whole group recognized and remembered. Isn't it worth asking what your own life would look like if generosity, rather than accumulation, was the clearest path to respect? None of this means life before money was some kind of utopia. Disputes happened, resources ran short, droughts and cold seasons, and failed hunts created real scarcity, and scarcity always tests people. But the tools early humans used to manage that scarcity weren't coins or prices. They were obligation, memory, and the simple, constant pressure of living inside a group you couldn't just walk away from. So when did something like money actually start to appear? The honest answer is, gradually, and for reasons that had less to do with convenience and more to do with scale. As groups grew larger, as strangers began trading with strangers who had no long-term relationship to fall back on, the old trust-based system started to strain. You can't rely on remembering who owes you a favor if you're dealing with someone from 3 valleys over, someone you'll likely never see again. That's the gap that early forms of currency began to fill. Not because barter was clumsy, as the old textbook story claimed, but because trust doesn't scale the way small communities do. Standardized objects of value, shells, cattle, metal rings, eventually coins, let strangers transact without needing a shared history first. Isn't it almost poetic that money may have been invented not to replace human connection, but to substitute for it, once groups grew too large for everyone to simply remember each other? Graeber pushed this idea even further. He argued that the very first units of account in human history weren't used to buy bread or trade tools at all. They were used to measure something more abstract: obligation, a dowry owed, a fine for an injury, a debt between families that might take a generation to settle. Long before coins jingled in anyone's hand, humans were already keeping track of who owed what to whom, just not in a form you could carry in a pocket. The ledger existed first in memory, then in notched sticks and clay tablets, and only much later in metal. That timeline matters because it means money didn't create the idea of debt and obligation. Debt and obligation created the conditions that eventually made money useful. Doesn't that completely rearrange the order most of us assume history happened in? There's a quiet lesson hiding in all of this. Long before markets, long before banks, long before anyone imagined a stock exchange, humans had already solved the basic problem money exists to solve. How do we get what we need from people who aren't obligated to give it to us? Their answer wasn't a system of exchange rates. It was a web of relationships thick enough to hold an entire community up. You still live inside fragments of that older system even now. Think about the last time a friend helped you move, or a neighbor watched your house while you were away, or a family member covered a bill without expecting immediate repayment. No invoice appeared. No interest accrued. You just knew, somewhere in the back of your mind, that the balance would even out eventually, the same way it did for people 10,000 years ago sitting around a fire. Money didn't replace human generosity. It just gave us a tool for the moments generosity alone couldn't reach. The strangers, the distances, the transactions too large or too impersonal for memory to carry. So try that thought experiment again. Life without money. Now picture it not as chaos, not as deprivation, but as something closer to what it actually was for most of human history. A life built on remembering who helped you and making sure sooner or later you helped them back.